this is a beginning of a program, not just a one-day webinar that we hope you get, and if you do, good luck. That's not what this is. This is the beginning. So with that in mind, Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started.
Okay, and can you see my slides, Alan?
Yes.
Slides
and everyone else, if you can see, yeah, we got some nods. Yes. Okay, you got it.
Looks like we're good. Okay, well, good afternoon. Again, as Alan mentioned, I'm Rick Slater, and I was with NASA for 31 years. About 27 of those years, I was in different technical areas. And the last 4 years, I was a small business specialist. And so that's how I got to know Alan. And so we had several conversations, and there were some things that we were doing that seemed interesting. So we decided to collaborate. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in the collaboration was to have one of the tracks of this Lunch and Learn series to be a NASA and NASA Primes. And it's gonna go beyond NASA and NASA Primes as we will start looking at other federal agencies and that. But what I'd like to do in this first, we've got two presentations, and the first one is kind of talk about what is this track going to do, what are we trying to do, and throughout all of this, we'd love to have your feedback on things that you would like to see, maybe a little different or extra. Or ask the question, hey, are you going to be talking about this in the future? So we're always looking for feedback from folks. This introductory slide, we actually came up with our own logo for this, for the entire Lunch and Learn series, and we're calling it the Business Innovation Series. And I'll just point out the picture you see at the bottom of the moon, and I was asked which one it was, and I couldn't remember which actual Apollo moon mission it was. I believe that's John Young there. But what's interesting is what they did in shooting the picture from the moon was they had 10 different pictures that all had to be stitched together. And when we went digital back in the late 90s, we actually did about 20 of these pictures. And throughout the series, I'll try to share a lot of different NASA pictures and everything with you. But this turned out to be a really, this is one of my favorites. Let's see, go on. Okay, so let's talk about, in this series, what we're really trying to do is get you information that can help you get contracts. As a small business specialist, there were an awful lot of times where I felt we just sort of had a lot of charts, and a lot of times, and I'll point out where in those charts that we used to see this, a lot of times I'm not sure we were doing a lot of the digging that you were never going to be able to do. And so part of working with the SBDC is that we're going to do some of that homework, and I'll point this out throughout the couple of presentations we've got. So the goal is to identify procurement opportunities. And I don't want to read this thing, but basically another piece of this is to get an understanding of the federal agencies, how they're put together, how you can find work with them, and how you can find where they even have that type of work that you do. Probably the most important one, and the one that even when I was at NASA, I had a hard time getting, was what are the actual needs? What is it technology-wise that the small business program can bring to the table? And what were our needs? And we'll talk about that in the next presentation. And some of it is to provide training to make clients more competitive in the marketplace. And that's really going to come from small businesses who have said, hey, you know, you talk about this, but we never get any training in this specific thing. And so we're going to be doing some of that, but I'll also point out, get back to us and let us know if there's something that you've always been needing. Let us know, and let's see if we can make it happen. the overview, there's several different pieces of this that we're going to try to include in the series. And my thoughts are that the NASA track will be probably the next couple of sessions before we actually finalize getting through NASA. And by that time, we'll start talking about some other federal agencies. One of the most important ones, and let me get rid of this thing here. There we go. In identifying procurement opportunities, what we want to do so that you don't have to go through the SBA website all the time. I'm going to get an idea from everyone as to the different technologies that they're capable of doing. And then oftentimes SBA and some of the primes, they'll go ahead and they'll have a big industry day. NASA does that all the time. But most of the time, it's difficult to find out what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. And honestly, even for me, it was difficult a lot of the time to get information, sometimes on our own center. We weren't told. And that can't possibly help you. So without going into a lot of detail, what we're going to do is start trying to get access on a regular basis and hopefully on a weekly basis. We can at least send out some of the things that we found or some of the things that SBA has sent me. We'll get out, what we'll do is we'll send a link out on an email every week, and we're going to have it on the SBDC website. So hopefully that does a little bit of help as far as getting some of the information out to you. Also, if there's events that we think you're going to be interested in, we're going to add those too. Another thing we're going to do, and we'll be starting this next month, is we're going to provide some small business speakers who've been successful getting contracts. And our first one is actually someone who started back in the 80s, started her own business in 2002. And it was very up and down in trying to get contracts. And of course, a lot of the work was subcontract work, but she can tell you what you really had to do to make it work. And if everyone that I've ever worked with, she's probably one of the most knowledgeable in doing that. Another thing is we're going to provide overviews on how to connect with the primes and the agencies and identify their needs. That one, we're going to be basically, we're going to be talking to a lot of the primes, and we're going to start with the 15 prime contractors at JSC, but then we're going to spread out and we're going to basically identify any primes that might have the kind of work that you're looking for. That one's going to take a little bit of work, and it's probably going to take a couple of months to even get that thing really working. Okay, provide overviews of how to connect with primes and federal agencies and identify their needs. It's kind of the same thing on doing that. I'm sorry, I just read the same one. So we'll just move on from there. Okay. Prepare clients to present primes to primes and agencies. How to make the most of a capability statement. And I won't talk a lot about that here, although I'm going to show you one in one of the later slides. But there's certain things that your primary point of contact, which are the small business liaison officers with the prime contractors, they are looking for certain things. And I'm going to show you an example of one that we helped a lot of the small businesses so that they had a capability statement that the SBLOs would actually look at. And in all honesty, the SBLOs told us that a good capability statement a lot of times makes the difference between whether they keep your card or they don't keep your card. And so whether you're going to actually be able to make contact with them. The SBLOs themselves, we're going to have a discussion of who they are, what they want to hear, And with any luck, I'll be able to get the SBLO I'd like to have online, because she'll talk about how to approach them, what's worked in the past, and the types of businesses and the types of information that if it's brought to them, they're able to connect with. On a yearly basis, we're going to conduct a matchmaking event. And we've done matchmaking events, and I'm sure you've been to matchmaking events in the past. And typically matchmaking events are, they'll ask for a list of all the small businesses that want to participate. And they basically tell the primes, hey, you need to participate in this. Oops, there we go. And you need to participate in this. And all they do is they kind of match up the NAIS codes. And to be honest with you, that's not all that effective. In fact, I've been on some where we had 6 minutes to meet with different small businesses when I was representing NASA. And it was not that effective. In fact, what was probably more effective was the people roaming the halls got to know each other. And that's really hit or miss. So we came up with, before COVID at NASA, we had come up with an idea that what we really needed to do was to meet with the primes and meet with some of the different NASA sections and establish what their real needs were and talk to the engineers. And so what I did was I went and I talked with the engineers, and the engineers basically, I asked them, why don't you come to these matchmaking events? And they said, very seldom do we ever talk to anybody who has the technology we're really interested in. And it's kind of a hodgepodge, so we just don't come. And I heard that with 3 different, actually, I heard that with 2 different NASA organizations. And I heard that from 2 or 3 of the primes. So we needed to do a better job of it. So we had begun, and then COVID hit. And so we weren't able to do the event the way we wanted to in last July. And so what we're doing is we're putting a matrix together of capabilities that has enough granularity that the engineers can look at, and then they choose who they want to visit with. And it'll be for a half an hour. They will, they'll bring their procurement people. The engineers will be there. And on the side of the primes, they'll have probably the SBLO, and they'll also have an engineer from whichever company you're meeting with. And in doing that, you've got an engineer talking to another engineer, and there is no other way to actually make a good connection. It just doesn't work all that well otherwise. So that's planned for June. We plan on it being about a 3-day event, because we're saying that every one of the connections and every one of those meetings have to be a half an hour. There is no other way to actually make a good connection. And what I got from the engineers with 2 of the large primes was, if you do that and I can look at a matrix and I can pick the people I want to talk to, we're in, we will come. I also talked to one other prime contractor just a couple of weeks ago, and they said, if you send us that matrix, we will share it with the engineers who are on procurements, and they have, I think it's 4 large procurements coming up. They said, we will take that. If you send us the matrix, I'll share it with the engineers who are deciding which subcontractors they need to have in the proposal. And that to me was and believe me, I haven't heard that one before, but they said, if you can get us that, we will provide it. That's another way of making contact. And they would probably just, contact you directly. To do that, I've got to create a capability matrix. And right now, what I'm doing is I'm putting all the categories that I've gotten so far from the Chief Technologist Office at NASA and from 3 of the prime contractors that I've talked to in the past. So all those will be on there. And so what you need to do is to, and we will send this out to everyone. Go ahead and fill it out, check mark the different capabilities that you have. And we'll also have a section for past performance. We'll have a section for unique capabilities that you've been able to get work with. And of course, you don't include the secret sauce on any of that. But we want to have enough information there that gets the engineer's attention. And that, to me, is the only way to do a matchmaking event. It's also much, much more difficult, but the results, I think the results will be much better. Training, we're going to try to do some training. And honestly, anyone has any comments, feel free to get those to me. You'll have my mine and Alan's emails after this. And so what I've got so far, I just threw a couple of examples down of things I think we need to do. Quality codes is one of them. And that's one that the primes have told us. Sometimes we have an outstanding company, but they've worked all commercial. They don't understand quality codes, which is basically the documentation that has to be delivered. And so if they don't understand the quality codes, we've got a little bit of time to work with them, but usually it becomes a problem unless they've really got at least an awareness of it before we start working with them. So we're working on having that training. The primes procurement process and how it differs from commercial. And the focus will obviously be on the primes procurement process. There's specific things that they have to do when you propose, how they have to evaluate it, who they have to send it out to, what are the options that they have. And so that would at least give you an idea of how you need to propose and some of the roadblocks that'll be thrown in there. You need to be aware of that. One that actually was pretty interesting, and we did this a couple times with as a panel with some of former chairs and contracting officers, is lessons learned on proposal writing. What to do, what things not to do. The one thing that always stands out is every NASA center, and I'll be saying this in the next presentation, everyone is their own unique fiefdom. They do things a little bit differently. I'm very familiar with Johnson Space Center, and what I'll key in on is sort of the similarities that most of the centers have when it comes to evaluating proposals. And I've got I personally chaired 2 of these, so I'll be helping on this too. But there's a couple of the contracting officers who would love to be able to provide me a list of some of the things that were simple, but they would be missed and they would miss points. So we're going to go ahead and have that kind of training. So that's it for this. Are there any questions on this part? No? Okay. I'm going to go on to.
While you're setting up the other one, question I'm going to ask, as we move forward and we start seeing some success with SBIR activity with our clients, and they're looking to go from a phase 1 to a phase 2. And there's the possibility that NASA would be one of the ones that would want to write a letter of support, memorandum of understanding, etc. Do you have contacts like like we would think of a tech scout, such as Tim Fowler, where you would be a resource to reach for our clients to reach to you, to where we could try to find the right program manager within NASA? Rick?
I'm sorry. I was doing something else. Could you repeat that?
So if we have, as we move forward and we have clients that end up with a phase one SBIR and they're looking for a sponsor, a memorandum of understanding, a letter of support to where they can go from phase one to phase two, would you be a good contact for NASA like as Tim Fowler would be for Space Force or Spacecom or for US Stratcom?
Yes, I'd be a good contact. And what I don't know, I'll have to do some digging, or I'll find somebody who does have the answer who can get back with
Good.
me.
Okay, good. All right, we're ready for you.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. I was writing. All right, so the second one, doing business with NASA, and the whole idea of this presentation is not to get too detailed. I'm going to try to keep it a fairly high level so you just understand how NASA is structured, how you can get information from NASA. What we're not going to get to is where you actually find out what the needs are. We'll talk about the Chief Technologist Office, where I will getting that information from, and that will happen next at our next session. So first thing, and we've got all our NASA small business specialists, and they are they're the door that's always open at each one of these different centers. And as I said before, every center is different. It has a different culture, right down to proposing. There tend to be different things about how you do that. They do their business somewhat differently. And if we get Denise on this next session, she'll go into a lot more detail about what it's like to deal with the different centers. But what I wanted to point out here was the centers are really different categories. And this chart right here is actually a little misleading because it looks like each one of the centers fit into a nice category, and they really don't. We've got research centers. Space centers are really operations centers. We have science centers. But if you look at between the research, the space, the ops, and the science, Goddard is probably all three. Johnson Space Center has a piece of all three. They may be primarily operations, but they also do research, and there's also a lot of science that goes in there. Jet Propulsion Laboratory, R&D Center is the way it was set up, years and years and years ago. But in reality, they're an ops center. They design, build, and put things on Mars. So they're a research, a science, and an operations center, along with being an R&D center. And basically, the contract itself for Jet Propulsion Laboratory goes to Caltech, and so they run it. Let's see. As far as how to get a hold of or start to get some information, these are the primary small business specialists at each one of the centers. The one I will point out, there's no sense in sending anything to, is going to be the bottom one, the NSSC with Troy Miller. That's primarily all the business of contracting is done there. So there's no contracts there that you would be talking to anybody about. And the generic email that's there, and if you notice, it's just basically the center, but it's a general email. Your best way to contact them and try to get some time to speak to them is to send an email to that address and say you would like to set up a courtesy visit to talk to someone. And A simple email will do it. If they don't get back to you in a couple of weeks, somehow it got missed, go ahead and send it again. But that's your best bet. And the most information you're going to get is by setting up one of those courtesy visits. A little bit on the relevance of subcontracting at NASA. And they always like to point out that the Orion program, which is under Lockheed Martin, had over 2,000 subcontractors. An enormous amount, about 10% of the dollars go to small business. And those are the NASA dollars, and they don't include NASA's primes. NASA primes have goals. And they have small business goals. They have a whole plethora of other goals like service disabled, hub zone, woman owned, and there's a couple of others. And they have to meet those goals. Well, in doing that, they spend more money than we do just with straight NASA contracts. And that ends up being another 10% of the budget. So about 20% of the budget actually goes to small business. And that can be either in the form of regular service contracts to other types of contracts, which would be just for parts. There's a huge amount of IT that's purchased through NASA. And so there's a lot of just, we'll call piece parts or engineering projects, small engineering projects that are all done. And most of those, a good deal of those go to small business. Now I want to take a minute. Let's see if this does it for me. Okay, let's see if it does it for me. There we go. Okay. This is the OSBP, or the Organization of Small Business Programs. There's Glenn Delgado, our associate administrator. I worked for him. We only had about 20 in our group. This is a website, and they're almost hidden on some of the information that if I were a small business, I'd be interested in. And so if you click on the How to Do Small Business with NASA, and you go to the About NASA Centers, and we'll just pick any one. In fact, we'll just pick the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It'll give you an overview of what goes on there, which is, I guess, somewhat useful. What does JPL buy? It gives you a general idea of the high-level service contracts that they have. At the same point, this is where you can actually dig in, and you can get their telephone numbers if you need to get them. Although, as I say, just going with the generic one will get you a courtesy visit, and that's probably your best bet. But at any rate, that gives you a little more information. It's also a little easier to contact people sometimes. If you go down through that, you've got the, where is it? NASA Acquisition Forecast. And we click another one, and I'm going to pull that up now. I hope I pull it up. There we go. This is the acquisition forecast. And I will tell you, it's only about a year out. And so it has limited use when you're a year out on some of these things, because by the time you see them, and the problem is it's always less than a year, because they put it together every quarter and they update it. Should be every quarter, but I've seen them do it every 6 months. So a lot of times, by the time you see this thing, it's already in the works. So this one is a little bit limited, but I will say a lot of times, at least you get an idea of some of the things that are going on there. And often they've pushed that thing out a year and a half, and so the timing isn't so bad. So we'll get rid of this. Okay, back it up a little. mentor protege program, and you're probably familiar with it, especially because the SBA has their own mentor protege program. But they completely revamped the program at Johnson. Well, actually, all of NASA. They redid the entire mentor protege program because it was very difficult. It took months and months and months and months to get the paperwork through the process. And Glenn finally decided a couple of years ago that he needed to streamline this. And so they've redone it. If you click on that, you'll get an idea of what the program is about. But the bottom line is, if you get with a prime contractor, and the way the program really works at the highest level is, a prime contractor, if they see a small business that they think can definitely help them with their products, also they have some expertise that the large prime needs, and so they're willing to actually propose them on contracts. The program is set up so that when you enter into the program, the prime has to give you work. They also have a lot of things they would have if you're not that mature an organization in government contracting. They will allow you to attend meetings, and their whole job is to A, give you some business, but B, make you more competitive in working in the federal arena. So that's just a quick overview. We'll do a little more in one of the other sessions. SBIR, STTR, we're going to be talking about that. Of course, next week is when we kick off the SBIR Phase 3. But we'll also be including Phase 1 and Phase 2 information. So I'm not going to go into it anymore, but next week we actually kind of kick that off. But if you want to know about NASA's, here's where you would find it. And there's some other information in the small business programs. These are just how they deal with veteran-owned businesses, service disabled, et cetera, et cetera. How to partner with NASA. There's information on partnering with NASA, but I'll be honest with you, what we're going to do in these sessions is to allow you to know where the opportunities are and where the needs are, so you can see if it's even worth pursuing. I won't go into any more of this, except that, I'll go back here. Okay. Good on that. So now I will. Okay, category management, and this is something that we went through for the last 2 years, and I think it's important to point this out. We're talking about here large service contracts, and that would be, above the $10 million a year, really. At one point in time, probably 4 years ago, they began doing this, and what they did was, if you were to take, say, custodial services, every center would have their own custodial service contract. Every contract would have communication services. And so they would have small contracts, and they were almost always small business. And so there were a lot of opportunities for prime contracts. What they did was they went ahead and said, okay, except for some things like environmental compliance and utilities and things of that nature, we're going to start having a single contract. It'll be at one of the centers, and all the centers will buy off that one contract. And if you see yourself in any of these, when the contracts come out, they are going to be worked through that particular center. The one good thing about it is that anyone who bids on these is never going to have, they're going to have subcontractors for a number of the other NASA centers. But this is just to get you an idea that whereas we used to have 10 of everything, now there's going to be one of everything, and it will be, we're hoping that most of them will remain small business, but I'm sure all of them will not remain small business. So that's a little bit of the direction that NASA's taken in the last couple of years. From there, and this is a chart that we always used to put out. And there's some things about it that I never really liked. And I'm going to point those out to you. At the same time, I'll point out some of the things that really do need to be stressed. And the first one was research. Understand NASA's mission and needs. Well, I can tell you, I was there for 31 years at Johnson, and there are whole areas that I didn't have a clue what their real needs were. And the engineers were difficult to get to. It was only when I got into the small business area that I actually started to reach out and try to get some of that information. But to be honest with you, that's something that I had a difficult time doing. And so when, and you see this with a lot of different agencies, I've seen always has that up there, except obviously it's their agency. And understanding their mission, that's nice. You can Google that. But their needs, that's a whole different ballgame. And so that's why with the matchmaking, we're going to have to dig a lot deeper. I've already talked to the chief technologist office at Johnson, and they're willing to share what they know about all of NASA, and obviously Johnson Space Center. They're going to have a better idea, and we'll be reaching out to the primes. But there's just very little chance that someone not having contacts inside the gate are really going to be able to get you a lot of that information. So that's something the SBDC and through this through our lunch and learns, that's what we're going to start providing. Get to know the center SBSs. That's your slide 8, and I've got one with pictures of the small business specialist at the end. Definitely, at least scheduling a courtesy visit will point you in the right direction. Responding to source thoughts, and I don't know how many. Yeah, go ahead.
Question on the courtesy visits.
Yeah.
Are the courtesy visits by Zoom, or how does that work? We had someone ask, are the courtesy visits in person or virtual?
Well, with COVID, they're all virtual. To be honest with you, before COVID, if people were local or they were visiting other contractors and they just wanted to, visit with us, it would be in person. The others were all telecoms. So it was always a telecom, and I always had like 4 or 5 slides that I could share with them, to follow through the discussion. So the easy way to say it is, I hope by July or so, things start opening up and they'll go back to in-person or virtual on Zoom. And they're starting to do them on Zoom now. So, and I'll be honest with you, if it's virtual on Zoom, I found them to be as effective as somebody coming in the door. So it's always nicer to meet somebody. But I found that these days our conversations can be just as effective virtually. And we really push for that because small businesses can't afford to travel, to come in town for that type of thing. So if you try to set one up with them, worst case scenario is it'll be a telephone call, but that's still pretty effective. And they'll give you slides with the information that you need. So that answer your question?
Yes.
I know COVID twists everything around. Although I will admit, COVID forced us to go, and we use Teams or we used to use, when I was there, we used Teams. Once we started using it, the telephone calls weren't as effective. So we, if anything, if COVID's done anything for us, it's pushed the fact that you can do things virtually and accomplish a lot. Okay, so yeah, research upcoming procurements. That's some of what I'm going to be helping with, is doing some of my own research. And when I kind of know what all the clients, what their capabilities are, I'll try to pick and choose and sensing things forward. And I'm sure you'll let me know whether I'm doing a good job or not. And we'll try to do some of that picking for you. Think subcontracting. When it comes to NASA, very seldom have I ever seen a contract come up and somebody who's small business. I've never seen where somebody really just came in and got a contract, unless they had actually been subcontracting for some other NASA folks, or it was another federal agency and they had enough experience. So your best bet is to always start by subcontracting. And if you ask any of the successful small businesses that have worked with Johnson, they're going to tell you that, and I'm sure Denise is going to emphasize that. Registering on the vendor database, and at the bottom there's a JSC vendor database. We set that up, oh gosh, about 7-8 years ago. It's good to be on there, and it does get shared by some of the large prime contractors. We'll share it with them when they want it. And in general, it was to look for subcontractors for procurements. And let's see, network, virtual or in person. And then the last one is, as soon as we get past COVID, the events, and all the centers have events, and networking is everything. At Johnson, we had 4 a year. We actually had one we called light manufacturing, where we invited in the small machine shops, circuit board manufacturers, folks that had those kind of skills, and we gave them a table instead of them coming to an event and trying to meet with large primes and everything else, even though the large primes have tables there. The way NASA tries to structure it is that each one of the centers is going to have 3 or 4 of those events, and it does end up being a good way of networking.
So Rick, we're good. We're running close to 12:50. I was going to ask you about the capability statement. One of the things I'd like to do is help everyone understand as we go forward that the Lunch and Learn is really our outreach for you. So as we do each of these Lunch and Learns, Rick will be talking about NASA again the next Lunch and Learn, and he'll be continuing down the path of understanding. But that is not the only way we're going to be able to get that information to you. So as we go forward, and he does, and we do outreach, and we get contact with you, we're going to probably have to have supplemental training that we're talking about. So it's not just because otherwise our matchmaking event is in July. So we would have how many times? We got March, so April, May, June. We'd have 3 times. So we're going to have to get you to step up and get involved as you see that this is a good opportunity for you. So just trying to help you understand how this pathway looks. Okay, go ahead, Rick.
Okay, and since we're running short on time, this is just an example that I showed folks, and then there's 5 or 6 things that are really important, and the SBLOs only look at these things for about 10 seconds, so they have to be structured so it's the information they want. We'll have in our training classes, I'll go over this in more detail. Next one. There is, if you go to your iPhone or Android, and this is the sticker, just do I think all you have to do is type NASA in there. You'll see this sticker, and this is the logo for it. And we'll go over this another time because we're running short on it. But if you, all the existing contracts, even if they're going to end in 5 years, are on that app. And so it's a really good way to find out where the existing contracts are and when they're going to end. And it's also got the, it's got the numbers so you can FOIA the information for the statement of work. So there's a lot of information, but we're running short on time, and I wasn't planning on going over all of these. I just want to introduce them.
So
last slide are pictures of all the folks. Now, somehow I'm still on there. And actually, this is interesting because this is live and they haven't taken my picture off and changed it for the new person. But these are pictures of the folks at all the different NASA centers. And so that's it.